going to make a real impact in the world and you want to develop skills that make you very employable, then you might want to think about studying environment issues. Environment issues are core to a lot of important challenges around the world. Challenges in how we feed people, how we have sustainable cities, how we manage bushfire, how we manage climate change, and so on. And it's a great opportunity to study environment issues at the ANU. The ANU has the Fenner School of Environment and Society. In the Fenner School, we recognise that environment issues have got that dimension to do with the plants and the animals and the trees and the soil and so on, but they always also have a human dimension. That's the society part. And we bring both of those elements to anything we study. We have leading researchers in the school that are making a big difference in the world themselves, but also play a role in teaching the courses that we teach. So if you're really passionate about environment, we've got a degree just for you called the Bachelor's in Environment and Sustainability. And that's a course that focuses in the Fenner School that has opportunities in other schools. But actually, you might be more interested in doing a Bachelor of Science or Arts, or you might want to study law or politics and still bring some environmental perspectives into one of those degrees. And this approach is possible too. It's really easy if you're doing a Bachelor of Science to choose plenty of environment subjects and mix them up with a few others. But even those other degrees have generally got the flexibility to bring in courses from other schools. And we love having these students in our environment courses too. Either of these options are great, and the ANU is a great place to be doing it. I hope you think about studying environment at the ANU. Okay, thanks for joining us. This is the Open Week, the virtual Open Week Q&A session, an expert panel on food systems. So that little introductory film gives you a little bit of context for the school, the Fenner School of Environment and Society that's being missed here today. Apologies that, as sometimes happens on Zoom, the quality of the sound sometimes wasn't perfect there. But anyway, I think you would have got the message that we're a school that's really interested in research and education on issues of environment and how that interacts with the lives of people. And one of the areas in which that plays out really strongly, obviously, is food, because everybody eats food. Most people love food. So food's a really fascinating area because it's so culturally important, it's so crucial to our lives, and it connects so many different environmental problems or arguably solutions to problems. So we're going to be talking about food systems, and before we jump into that, I'm going to ask the panelists to introduce themselves, and I'll start with Craig.
Yeah, thanks, Saul. Hi, I'm Craig. I'm a researcher at the Fenner School of Environment and Society. My research area is looking at soil development, erosion, particularly wind erosion, so dust storms. And that all relates back into the idea of land management practice and how we can manage our land to make sure that we can continue to grow food into the future. I'm also lecturer at the school, and so I deliver content across first year courses and then into soil science and land management courses towards the latter years. I also have another role in the school where I work with all of our course conveners and help shape the curriculum so that the degree that we put together is working in the interest of the students and the graduates that they build, or the graduate attributes that they build throughout that program. So, I've got an active research space, a bit of a teaching space, and also a bit of an admin space. But it's all about trying to get the best education possibilities for the students.
Thanks, right. Craig. And actually, Craig used the word land a lot there, which reminded me that I missed something really important when we opened up. And whenever we do an event that welcomes guests to the Fenner School, it's important to acknowledge that the place we work belongs to First Nations people. So I want to acknowledge that the ANU campus, where we all study and research, is on the land of Ngunnawal and Ngambri people. I want to pay my respects to their elders past, present
and emerging. And actually, this is not just something we like to do in events, but trying to better understand how Indigenous people have managed resources in Australia for tens of thousands of years is another interest area in the school. I don't know if it's going to come up in a food systems conversation, but let's see. So with that, Rob, can I ask you to introduce yourself?
Yep. So I'm Robert Dyball, and obviously I am a lecturer at the Fenner School. And my area is human ecology, and human ecology, as perhaps the name suggests, is very much about what you saw being talked about in the introductory trailer Fenner video. The intersection between the environments that nourish us, support us, allow us to flourish, feed us, clothe us, provide us all the things that we need to survive in the world, and the socio-cultural aspects of what it is to be a human that causes us to choose to wear the clothes we wear, eat the foods we eat, live the kinds of life that we live, and of course have expectations of what is normal, what is comfortable, what is our rights, and what we feel that we're entitled to. And then thinking about how, as we pursue those beliefs, those expectations about what it is to live a good life, how that in turn then affects those environments around us. So that's a big topic, and you can think about all sorts of relationships between human groups and communities through history and across time and space in those ways. So to have a specific research focus, my primary interest is in food and food systems, and how communities and cities access the food that they need to, well, ideally live well, and then of course in many places not live so well because they either don't access enough food to fully nourish their communities, or of course in many places they access far too much of the stuff and overindulge and cause health problems as a consequence. And we do work across Australia and through particularly the Asia Pacific region, but in fact ultimately globally, how landscapes like Australian landscapes that you heard Craig talk about are providing food that gets eaten anywhere around the world, from Tokyo through to Afghanistan through to Copenhagen. So that's my interest, and I'm very much interested in the sustainability and justice dimensions of the way that we manage our food systems. So thanks for joining us tonight.
Yeah, thanks, Rob. And I'll talk a moment in how you can ask questions. That's part of what we're doing today. But just before we go there, I'm going to ask Bronwyn to introduce herself and her interest in food.
Thanks, Saul. I'd also like to acknowledge that I'm a visitor to the country that I'm currently sitting on. I actually grew up on Darug and Gundungurra country in the Blue Mountains west of Sydney. But I've lived, studied and worked on Ngunnawal, Ngambri, Narrabri country for the past 22 years. So I'd like to offer my respects and gratitude to elders past, present and emerging. Not only for their extraordinary care of country over millennia and also for keeping me safe while I'm on country, but just for the generosity with which they share their knowledge and culture. And a particular shout out to Uncle Wally Bell in that regard, who I've learned a lot from over the years, and also in his attendance at Fenner events. So thank you and greetings to any First Nations people in the audience. I'm currently a PhD scholar at the Fenner School, and my research looks at sustainable food systems using a human ecological approach. I'm really interested in how we might facilitate transitions to more biosensitive communities, ones that are in tune with, sensitive to and respectful of the life processes that underpin our existence, And as part of my project, I'm speaking with farmers and consumers who are involved in community-supported agriculture in Australia and Aotearoa, New Zealand, to better understand what has changed for them as a result of participating in community-supported agriculture, why they started, what motivated them to start participating in the first place, and then what's changed for them, and what those transition processes were like. I've also been involved in teaching during my time at the Fenner School. I've tutored and lectured into Rob's Human Ecology course, also tutored for the Vietnam Field School, and last year I convened Fenner's Sustainable Agricultural Systems course with input from a number of other academics, including Craig and Rob, and indeed with a guest lecture by yourself, Saul.
Indeed.
So that's me in terms of my roles at the Fenner School.
Great, thanks, Bron. And maybe I should introduce myself a little bit more fully too. As you might have noticed in the video, I'm the director of the Fenner School. But it happens that my research area, which is broadly across biodiversity in landscapes, a lot of my work's actually in agricultural landscapes. And so my biodiversity focused work has increasingly ended up crossing over into being work about food systems as well. So although I'm going to leave most of the talking to our three guests, I might hop in every now and then with some observations about the role of different organisms in supporting food production. Now, if you look in the chat box, you'll see that there's some instructions about both the fact that this webinar will be recorded and available on the Open Week website, and also that if you would like to ask a question, then you can use the Q&A. If you're here live, that is, you can use the Q&A function, or you can use the chat box if you can access that, and you can put up a question anytime you might want to. But I'm going to get the conversation started by asking an open question that any of our panelists might want to address, and that is, it's about the word systems. We all know what food is, but why are we talking about food systems here? What's the systems part meant to convey when we describe this area as food systems research?
I could lead off with an answer on that. If you think about the way that communities provision themselves with the food that they need over history, that process has typically got increasingly more complex. And Bronwyn, and indeed yourself, touched on hunter-gathering food systems where you would have lived in space, lived on landscape, lived on country with an intimate knowledge about what food resources were available on that country, where it was, what it was doing at any point in time, and how you would access it, and who had the rights to access that food, and indeed and other resources. But as things like cities have grown, those food procurement processes have grown increasingly more complex and increasingly more extended from the immediate hinterlands that surround the people who are feeding them. And so we need ways to understand these now, in many places, globalized food systems with their energy and material impacts in ways that don't get ourselves lost and bogged down in the sheer enormity of the complexity of how globally extended food systems work. So systems concepts allow us to think about very, very complicated processes using some relatively simple ideas of things like feedback and accumulations and declines and steady states to understand relationships between these socio-cultural expectations and norms and environments that we may be affecting through our daily lives almost anywhere on the planet.
That's interesting, Rob, because in an agricultural production system, and I just use the word system, we're probably constrained a little bit in our thinking that we might be talking about the soil, the fertilizer, the water, the plant, and then it leaves the farm, and then it might flow into a market system as well. So we often tend to separate them, don't we? But really what you're saying here is that we're beyond that. You know, we really do need to view it as a complete interacting network.
And as a soil scientist, in part of your worldview and practice, obviously, if your soils are declining by exporting organic matter, nutrients at rates that far exceed the rate at which those materials reaccumulate through biological processes, it's as sure as night will follow day that at some point in the future those soils will exhaust in the same way that a bath will empty if you leave the plug out. And so how we create circular economies where those nutrients are delivered back to the landscapes of origin, of course, is a huge challenge for us.
Yeah.
You're getting into questions there about the impacts of food production on the environment, and I guess also the impact of environmental change on food. Can you just talk about what are some of the main dimensions to that problem at the moment? Is it about water? Is it about climate change? Is it about the exhaustion of soils?
So if we take a plant, if we just take the cereal growing industry, say wheat, barley, triticale, you know, the foundational rice, which is a foundation food source for many people. The depletion of soils in terms of nutrients is becoming an increasingly limiting factor. So we, you know, with the advent of artificial or inorganic fertilizers, we've increased production or the yield. We're reaching sort of the maximum level we could push the current plants at that system. Another really big driver is climate change. So as we increase the carbon dioxide levels and also temperature, we're really pushing what the plant can physiologically do at the moment. So, and also temperature is now impacting the growing seasons. So a classic is a Australian wheat industry where you need to harvest before you get summer rainfall or summer storms. And so as we increase the frequency of summer storms, we're now having an impact on the quality of the product, which then impacts the yield as well. So we've got these multiple pressure points, climate, the resource base of the soil, trying to get a greater realization, as Rob was just talking about, trying to get the organics or the biology working in the soil again so we can start to build a more resilient soil landscape. And then that also is related to the increasing amount of drought as well. So the frequency or the periods of low rainfall are starting to push the systems. So we need to build a more healthy, resilient soil landscape as well. So there's multiple pressures, which everyone's trying to work furiously at the same time.
But then one of the other dimensions of food is how it impacts on human health. And I think there's already been some mention by, I think, both Bron and Rob about problems of malnutrition, both undernutrition and overnutrition. In what ways is the sort of the way we do agriculture driving health problems, or is that the wrong way to look at it? What can we talk about the connection between the human health outcomes and the agricultural practice?
So I draw Bronwyn in at this point because of the nature of her research, but I think one of the things that we're interested in coming out of human ecology is the gulf, the enormous disconnect that we've managed to create for ourselves between how that food turns up in the supermarket and how we choose whether we're going to have an avocado this evening as part of our tea here in Canberra in the middle of the winter with absolutely no concern or knowledge about who produced it, where it got produced, what the seasonality of avocados is, where they, under what circumstances they grow. And the fact that at the end of the day, we are utterly reliant both on farming communities and those landscapes that Craig's been talking about to make that food available. And then the coupling of that disregard or lack of understanding, knowledge or care with the massive squandering of wasted food in the food systems as they're currently configured, such that typically between a quarter to a third of the food that landscape is forced to yield under these systems, with all the pressures that go with that, but having caused it to yield that food, we then proceed to waste about a third of it without it ever being consumed by a human being. So part of what Bronwyn is about is thinking about different systems where those distances between the reality of the ecosystems and the lifestyles of farmers, their economic needs, their motivations to produce food, and consumers is in some way brought closer proximity.
Ron, did you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I think there are lots of different ways that the food system impacts human health, and I think taking a food system approach lets you see those. So it's not just about what we consume and how much we consume, but also about the well-being of the ecosystems and the earth others that are involved, but also the livelihoods for farmers and food workers all the way along the chain. And I think we know that food industries, food processing farmers have a higher kind of rates of occupational injury, they have higher kind of suicide rates than the general population. So there are some, health and well-being issues for farmers and food system workers, as well as huge kind of nutritional diet-related diseases and conditions for consumers. We've got, billions of people in the world that can't meet their energy requirements from day to day. We've got billions of people that are experiencing kind of overweight and obesity and struggling to keep their kind of health, their weight within a healthy range. And then across those populations, we've got people that don't get enough micronutrients from that either too high a calorie consumption or kilojoule consumption, but not getting enough micronutrients. So there's this kind of perverse outcomes as a result of the types of food we're eating and the way that we get our food. And I think kind of constant power concentration issues and highly convenient, energy dense but nutrient poor food available in supermarkets pretty much 24/7 really creates a very different kind of food environment in which people make choices to eat. And so in my research, I'm looking at community supported agriculture and produce box schemes. And in these sort of short food supply networks, there's a direct relationship between a farmer and a group of consumers. And those consumers pledge upfront support for the farm in return for a share of the harvest. And they're explicitly sharing the risk and reward of farming with the farmer, so the farmer doesn't have to bear all of that uncertainty and inherent variability of agriculture on their own. And the farmer's getting a really dedicated, committed, certain supply sort of demand with sort of supply of income usually up front at the beginning of the harvest. And what we know from overseas and what's coming out from my research is that there are a lot of benefits for farmers for engaging in these short food supply networks. They really enjoy the kind of financial, emotional support that comes with these really strong relationships that become friendships kind of year on, year out. And those relationships are also something that many of the consumers benefit from. But other things that happen for the consumers are they tend to eat more vegetables, a greater variety of vegetables. They tend to enjoy cooking more and eating less processed food.
Isn't it interesting that they're eating more vegetables when they've actually had to follow seasonality, which you might think would restrict their options, but you're actually arguing it goes the other way.
Yeah, I actually think what happens is people just get in a rut of eating the same vegetables over and over again. So just some of the interviews I've been doing recently, people saying we used to always just get sweet potato, broccoli and eggplant. That was what we always did. But even though there was, supposedly huge amount of choice at the supermarket, but actually people just get in ruts. So forcing themselves outside of their comfort zone and having to eat seasonally, a lot of people are finding that. Certainly some people found that they were eating narrower ranges at particular points in time, but eating much more seasonally. But most people found that, well, a lot of people that I spoke to really enjoyed the seasonality because it made them appreciate those foods even more, because they could only access them within a certain window. Right. So people were getting very excited about their strawberries and their cherries because they weren't having them all the time. But when they did get them, they just tasted, seemed to taste even more amazing than normal, because they weren't having them day in, day out. And probably because they were fresher, organically grown. So they also seemed to have place a greater value on the food that they're receiving from their farmers, because they know the story of the farm, they know the story of the farmers. And so some people have been saying that they've noticed that the amount of food they waste has decreased because of the way they relate to the food.
So I'm going to remind any attendees that if they want to ask a question, they please do, and use the Q&A box or the participant, the chat box. But I'm actually going to ask my own question now. And listening, especially to you then, Bron, it got me thinking a lot about supermarkets and thinking about the COVID-19 experience that we're all having all around the world. We've seen all sorts of effects on the food supply chains, and on employment, and well, almost everything's affected one way or another by COVID-19. I guess I'm asking an open question to all of you. What do you think the current COVID-19 crisis might be revealing about the nature of our food system, and perhaps ways in which we should learn from this and improve it for the future? Any comment from anybody on that?
So there's a number of factors that we have students researching on, and thinking particularly here honours level of the what we would say the pre-existing vulnerabilities that these globally extended food systems had. They've not been caused by COVID, but the COVID has definitely brutally realised the vulnerabilities of things like just-in-time production systems, and all the socio-cultural dimensions that go with that. So a few people would know that for your little baby spinach that you get in a nice little pack, somebody almost certainly a migrant labourer has queued up at 3 o'clock in the morning to be picked as a picker to harvest that spinach and get it to the supermarket in time for it to be there. And of course, the movement of those people has been truncated, either coming in from overseas as seasonal pickers or moving around the nation as of course in Australia the picking harvest time moves with the various seasons. Those itinerant working groups, typically pretty poorly paid, pretty insecure job fronts, have not been able to provide those services. And that everything that Bronwyn's talking about involves ways that you would create other sorts of bonds that then become more resilient because there's other pathways and other relationships that are linking producers to the consumers. So that's definitely an area that we're interested in, and whether a bit like Bronwyn's been talking about with people joining the community supported agricultural schemes, whether people have through COVID-19 have tried out different food production procurement pathways, like going to the farmer's market instead of going to the supermarket, and actually found that these shorter supply chains are far from being more inconvenient that they thought they would be than buying from supermarkets. Actually find that there's other values, other things to enjoy, other pleasures to be taken out of re-celebrating food rather than just picking up a can and opening it. So these are again human ecology and the socio-cultural dimensions of how these things like COVID have changed the way we habitually do this everyday practice of eating culturally appropriate foodstuffs.
Mm. And I wanted to make perhaps a trivial observation, but something that really struck me, that when we were faced with the question of what is essential, you know, we had to decide what stays open, what doesn't. And I think in a highly developed society, it's easy to forget that not everything is just, you know, retail for pleasure, and to realise that we've created this system where it appears that supermarkets are essential to our lives, unless we start to think a bit deeper and realise that actually there could be another way of getting food to us. But so many of us have gotten to the point where we imagine that, in fact, if the supermarket closes, then the whole system would collapse. Yeah, and the knowledge that behind that there are all those labourers keeping the food system going, and perhaps the value of that labour is a bit more in our faces now than it is in a normal year.
That and the efficiency narrative that's driven how these systems run, such that the main decision-making process all along the supply chain, from production through to delivery to the supermarket and retail, has simply been what is the cheapest, most efficient way that the produce could be turned into a saleable product. And so we've seen that process in places like the United States see the number of abattoirs, for example, meat works, close down to being very, very few numbers of incredibly centralized, industrialized processing plants that then becomes epicenters for outbreaks of COVID, because the workers are insecure and can't afford not to turn up to work and don't have health care. And then those meat works go down and the entire seaboard's pork supply is thrown into jeopardy.
Mm.
Other comments from maybe other people have maybe spoken enough.
Those ideas of bottlenecks just persist right through the food chain, don't they? You know, I think Rob, you touched on it nicely about even the perception of economic paradigms in how we should grow food. You know, the fact that we talk about yield. You know, how many tons per hectare. You know, we keep on challenging and pushing to get more and more and more. Which then chips away at the reality of what Bron was talking about in terms of food density and food nutrition. Yes, we can produce more, but the quality decreases. You know, so that in itself is a bit of a bottleneck. And then we go into the transport bottleneck, and then the manufacturing, and then the retail, as Saul was pointing out. So it is challenging. I think what's really exciting about, you know, this teaching/research interface is when you do go onto farm with a bunch of students and you have a land manager that acknowledges just these pressures, acknowledges the impact on them as a producer, and then says, I don't want to play in that game. There must be a better way to do this. How do we change this system? And then starts to innovate.
So, Craig, can I just, at that point, I was thinking we should probably get on to talking a bit about how we teach in the Fenner School, and you've alluded there to the idea that, you know, sometimes we teach by going out onto the land, talking to farmers and so on. Can you talk a little bit more about the teaching approaches we use in the school?
Yes. So at the Fenner School, we have a really strong philosophy of trying to get students into the field, or bring the stakeholders or the people that are working in the field into the classroom. So it's about that practical sense of learning. So to put the theoretical frameworks into reality. There's nothing better than getting into the landscape and trying to understand and hearing what someone's perspective is. So a farmer, you know, we can go on to farm and we can listen to the managers, we can hear their innovative ideas. And you get...
So Craig, that's not your PowerPoint there. That looks like your Finder folder.
Okay. How about that one?
That's better.
Yep. So we can get on to farm, and you get to hear the honest opinion from the managers, you know, and then that's that great sense of reflection from the students, a great opportunity to reflect and listen to how things work. This is a farm that Bron organised last year, I think it was. Bron, do you want to talk about, this is a really good example of short chain food systems, I would have thought.
Yeah, this is, I don't know if you can actually click that to make it bigger, to actually
view mode. Put it in view mode.
But yeah, it looks like Winland House, urban micro farm, which is actually in the township of Braidwood, about an hour away from Canberra. And they farm just in a large suburban block, so it's 1,000 square metres. Are run by Bronwyn Richards and Helen Lynch. You can see Bronwyn there leading the students chasing what seems to be the solo chicken. I think one of the students wanted to ask it why it hadn't crossed the road yet, but never did find out the answer to that. But they use permaculture, organic principles, and what they call biointensive polyculture. So they've got mixed animals and plants. They've got poultry for eggs and tables, so chicken, turkey, ducks and geese. Sometimes when they're not in drought, they might have a few pigs and sheep. And then they've got all sorts of annual vegetables that they plant in quite kind of intentionally plant multiple different crops very close to each other to maximize the amount of things that they can grow on that small space. So they call that biointensive polyculture, and it's amazing. The students were blown away by how much could be produced in that small area, just with that kind of very knowledge intense intentional way of planting, interaction of animal and plant systems to kind of keep the soil health and nutrient cycling as much as possible local to their kind of 1,000 square metre plot of land. And they sell into various farmers markets. I think they run their own produce box scheme, and they also sell into a multi-farm produce box scheme run by a not-for-profit here, Southern Harvest Association, which is part of my research. So some really interesting things. They experiment with what they were calling a hotbed, which is what you can see down the bottom of the screen, where they were actively composting to raise the temperature of the bed so that they could actually start seed germination a couple of weeks early to kind of extend the growing season, because out in Braidwood it's pretty cold.
Yeah.
So pretty narrow cool climate windows for growing. So lots of interesting experimentation are there, and that was just one farm that we visited.
We'll talk a bit there about the idea of teaching happening in the field and in contact with farmers. Craig, can you talk through a little bit about the actual undergraduate and postgraduate offerings? So if someone wanted to come to the Fenner School and work on food and agriculture sorts of questions, what do we actually teach in that space?
Good question, Saul. So within the degree program, we have a range of courses that builds your knowledge. And just before I answer that, I think an important motivation to go to a small farm like this one is that it allows students to start to contemplate so many physical processes that are happening in that little 1,000 square meters. And then it allows students to start to translate that and expand it. How do you take those skill sets and broaden it out, scale it up, those sort of issues. That sort of underpins the philosophy of our teaching. So, we'll come in at a first year level and we'll be laying some foundation knowledge about biophysical drivers and then also some society or social drivers as well. Once you then move into second year, we can start to specialise our knowledge in human ecology or the interface between society and environment, and then into some of the biophysical sciences as well. This coming year, so in 2021, we're offering a course which is called Agricultural Science, where we'll be laying some of those foundational pieces of how does agriculture organise itself across Australia. What are the drivers, what are the constraints, what are the opportunities? And then you move later through into, we have a course called Sustainable Agricultural Systems, where we start to layer that system thinking into it a little bit more deeply and start to contemplate the linkages between not just how we produce food, but how it interacts with the human operations as well, society. And a third year course that we're offering in 2021 is called Agricultural Innovation. So it really starts to bed down deeply that agricultural systems thinking, sustainable systems thinking, and goes into, well, how does it work with the broader structural drivers, the global markets, the economic paradigms, the legal constraints. So it's really layering the depth of the whole food chain. That is just really in the agricultural human systems lens. There are a whole range of other biophysical or social science courses that complement that enormously. I'm thinking like environmental economics, environmental policy, environmental law. All of these issues drive how we manage our food system. So I was just reflecting on that, on the complex systems thinking, what Rob was describing, of how we can turn, how it produces perverse outcomes. If we understood the policy drivers, or we knew how we could start to modify policy, maybe we can have an impact on human choice or what people are allowed to buy. Rob, do you have any other value adds in terms of thinking about the curriculum and the teaching in this space?
Just to make this point that FENA sits in a network of related studies that basically cross other aspects of the ANU, with other areas that we collaborate with. Obviously, climate change is a huge dimension, both which agriculture is both driven by, but also a major driver of. And so we have courses that partner with other areas of the ANU that are working in those spaces, and indeed outside of the ANU altogether, across with people at CSIRO and other local institutions, and indeed internationally through international partnerships and learning opportunities, examples that we draw in from places like the Philippines. So that idea that you're saying about how you can, if you like, start small and build, follow your interest, follow where these food systems lead, it almost knows no bounds, but that FENA's pretty uniquely positioned to help you find those pathways and connections.
Mm.
So we're coming towards the end of our time here. I want to remind any attendees that they're more than welcome to ask a question using the Q&A box at the bottom of the Zoom screen. But I have a feeling that Craig might also be about to talk about a master's degree that we're launching. Is that true, Craig?
Yeah, I think it was a comment Rob just made about Fenner being in a really good place because we collaborate with a lot of the other schools within ANU. Fenner in itself, hopefully we can see just from this discussion, you know, there's a breadth of disciplines within the school. In 2021, we're introducing, the ANU is introducing a new type of agricultural master's program, and we'll also be delivering some of the content at undergraduate level as well. Now, the difference that we're doing here is that we're actually looking for people with different knowledge bases, different disciplines, different interests, different expertise that then can come and work together in problem-based, multidisciplinary teams to actually apply that knowledge to an agricultural context. So if we want to think about some of the great challenges to the food system, we actually need to think outside of the square. We actually need to converse and work with multiple groups and multiple knowledge bases to try to find effective solutions. And you know, that might mean that we need the policy people or the economists or the biologists to help do some genetics. So the model that we're working with is we bring these what we call cognate knowledge or discipline knowledge, and then we pass it through an agricultural lens, and then we have graduates that are ready to engage in the workplace. A more traditional model in the agricultural science is that you come in as an agricultural scientist or with that view, and then you start to learn all these disciplines, and then you go out into place. So this one is really a collaborative problem-based approach. You're muted, Saul.
Then you didn't hear what I just said. Okay, look, we're coming pretty much to the end of the session. There's an opportunity for any of my experts to have make a final comment about anything they might have been hoping to raise. And there's an opportunity for anyone to ask a question in the Q&A. That doesn't seem like any questions are coming in. Okay, well, look, if that's all we have for the moment, then I want to thank my panel for coming together and sharing their knowledge about food systems and about how the Fenner School of Environment Society teaches and researches in this space. Thanks for coming along. Thanks to those who have attended this session live, and thank you to all who might be picking this up as a recording on the website. And I guess the last word is we strongly encourage you to consider coming and joining the ANU, and we even more strongly encourage that you might come and do some of the subjects that we offer in the Fenner School of Environment Society, and we think there's some great stuff connected to food, agriculture, people, environmental health, and a bunch of connected areas there. So thank you for that, and goodbye.
Thank you very much.
See you later.
Thank you.